Good morning. I'm Steve Clemons. I'm editor-at-large of Semafor. Thank you all for joining us. I know that this is hump day in Davos, and I know that last night most of you were up till 3 in the morning. If you weren't, we'll get you on the right list next year. So we're going to have fun. And what I thought I was doing, I want to invite up to the stage my friend Fran Katsoudas. Come on up, Fran, who's the executive vice president. I just called her. She's basically in charge of everything at Cisco, but she is the chief people person, the chief, chief purpose person, and chief policy person. Fran, come in and join me here. And when we conceived this morning, we are also very honored. In a moment, we'll have the Minister for Public Education and Science from the United Arab Emirates, who also happens to be head of the UAE Space Agency. I am obsessed right now in how societies, companies, countries upgrade, upskill, train, and where technology, which has in a strange way become controversial, becomes a help in the society we're trying to sculpt and what we want to become, and what are all the component pieces of that. And so, Fran, you and I have had a bunch of cool conversations, and I want to bring this crowd into this and just share with them, a little bit about, how, particularly globally. Yesterday, you and I had a great discussion about ESG and purpose and what that means. But I'm really interested in how Cisco is helping nations deal with their upskilling challenges, and how the technology gives an opportunity to create a strategic leap. And I'm going to put it in my words, out of the crap we sometimes have in our societies, the dysfunction, the gender unevenness, a lot of things that are problems that when you invest in kind of new infrastructure, it gives you opportunities you wouldn't otherwise have. So give us a take on, particularly when we last talked, it was in Africa, about Africa we're doing, but globally, how are you approaching the upskilling and tech arena?
Okay, so let me start by just sharing a few numbers, which kind of make me pause sometimes. So our networking academies are all over the world, and they started about 25 years ago. And the purpose was to really help people that were either in what we would call high school in the US, or perhaps people that didn't think that they were going to go to college, maybe didn't have the means to go to college, to help them have a path into technology. And in doing so, for Cisco, what would happen then is we would broaden the capability in an area, which was also good for the company. And the number that I want to share is in 25 years, we have trained 17.5 million students. At the moment, we are on a run rate of about 3 million students per year, 3.5.
And how's it distributed, U.S. and the world?
So we actually do a bit more outside of the U.S.
Really?
Yeah, we do. And so the biggest areas from an education perspective have been Africa, Latin America, and then Europe and the United States from a numbers perspective. And really, it has opened the doors. And what we've seen over the last few years, as you all know, is there are topics like security that are so incredibly important. And being able to train people for free that allows them to get their foot in the door, and even certification in areas like security can create amazing opportunities for them as individuals, but help countries and companies as well.
So I think one of the things, I want to talk about the United States for a minute, even though this is a global formula, but I want to talk about the United States, that I find not yet disrupted is really our broader advanced education institutions. And I've been really interested in credentialing and how do you give people, right now we're in blockchain hub. We talk a lot about tokens. We talk a lot about, having assets that become more nimble that you can move. Well, people right now don't seem to have as many assets or tokens or credentials, for the various skills that they might have. We're still very much stuck in the winner takes all, 4-year degree mindset. Do you think it's part of your mission to disrupt American education? And I'm just very fussy.
No, it's funny.
I have to do this. I just have to do this. I'm sorry. Look,
We're all good.
there's
We're
nobody
all
over
good.
there. So anyway, it's just the way I am. Okay. So yeah, are you going to disrupt? Are you going to disrupt the American 4-year college obsession? And I think I also don't like this word destigmatizing the other side. Basically raising up people so that they have a different alternative track that they can be proud of and become part of a different alternative way to deal with sharing their skills.
That disruption's already happening. And I think COVID accelerated some of that as well. And what we saw in the US, as an example, is that admission to community colleges went down significantly during COVID. The other thing that's happening, and when I talk to a lot of my peers across multiple companies, is that 5 or 10 years ago, you couldn't get a job unless you had the 4-year degree. And that's not the case anymore. Part of that is because there's great technology that can assess skills. And so the degree is secondary. The other thing that happened was there was a talent shortage. And if you are looking for someone in security, to be honest, you just want the skills, and it's not as important whether or not they have a degree. And so I think what we're going to see and what's happening already is that certifications have a lot more power. For those who get the 4-year degree,
Right.
we're not done, because the technology in the world is changing so quickly that I think we have to feel that we're always in school to a certain extent.
When you are basically working around the world and doing this, what are the characteristics of, let's say, I don't know what you're doing in the UAE, if anything, what are the characteristics of good countries versus bad countries you deal with?
Gosh, I wouldn't really characterize many bad countries. What I would say is that
That's why you're not a journalist. You're,
what I would say is that for every country, there's a continuum as it relates to access, as it relates to digitization. And for some of the countries that in the past you would have looked at as a step behind, I think there's a leapfrog that's happening around digitization that can be powerful. When we talk about Africa, one of the beliefs that I have is that if we, from a US perspective, can partner, can listen, can support, not only is it going to be great from a business perspective, I think there are countries within Africa that can leapfrog as well. And so I think those are the things that you look at, but that brings us back to skills. Because for a country to leapfrog, you have to have the skills and the capabilities that really enable that.
One of the books that I've been fascinated with by Brad Smith of Microsoft is called Tools and Weapons. And what Brad is basically saying is that the advances in technology, particularly in communications, but in AI, quantum, but across a wide variety of issues, have dual uses. They can be great for all the sort of social choices and advances that we have, but they can also be used by governments against their own people. And he was speaking specifically about China, facial recognition software, et cetera, and said that governments have to become better regulators in this way, and we need to negotiate deals. Is Cisco part of any of that? And do you have concerns when you're looking at your own technology track? Is government a lag effect? I mean, are we internationally, like at Davos right now, creating the platforms to discuss the danger side of technology as well as the opportunities?
It's a really complex issue. I was attending a panel last night that Chuck Robbins, the CEO of Cisco, was on. And what he was talking about is that there is a role around how we share information, especially as it relates to cybersecurity. And something that he shared was, and this is something that we shared as a company over the summer, we had proof, and we knew that there was a group that kept trying to hack into Cisco, and they were trying for about 3 months. And Chuck said that when he talked to the government about it, they knew exactly who they were. And what are the mechanisms so that we can learn that earlier? And there can be lessons. When we learned that that happened, what we did as a company was we communicated exactly what occurred, because the more that we can share and learn, the better. But I think you're right. I think we have to be incredibly thoughtful. I think we could, in some places, establish guardrails that make us a lot smarter with technology. And I think at the heart of it, there's a privacy dialogue that I think we have to keep front and center, because tech can do so much today.
What is the state of women in technology?
Oh, goodness. Could we just, talk about something a little bit easier?
Well, let me frame it in a way. You are known for being one of the hubs to be supportive of other executives, women executives in technology. And I just want to be candid. And my friend Liz Hoffman is here from Semafor. And if we, or be honest about, high tech companies in Silicon Valley, both in terms of gender, but also, race, there is a lot of white guys that dominate, that industry and coming in. We've had a lot of focus on that. And I know that one of your objectives has been to try to mentor, to build networks that are supportive. And I'm just sort of interested in, should we have an annual, gender report on, achieving parity in the tech sector, and who are the villains in the story?
So I think the more that we can share and be transparent about data, we're going to see change. And, one of the things that I point to is it was when companies started sharing pay parity information that you saw the most movement. And then if you look at areas like in the UK, it was a requirement. And not only was it a requirement, but there was a template. And I will tell you that no one likes the template, but it drives some really good behavior. And I think the more transparent we can be, it's critical for us. And then to the first part, what I would tell you is that I do think year over year, there's momentum that we should be absolutely proud of. I just came this morning from a Women in Tech breakfast that we host, and I will tell you, I always leave that session inspired. And I see around that table a tremendous amount of role models for other women. And what we know from a data perspective is that when you are joining the workforce, one of the first things that you do is you look above you to see if there's someone who looks like you, who has similar experiences to you. And when you see that, that is incredibly validating. And so I think from a women in tech perspective, everything that we can do at Cisco to come together, even with competitors, to put the focus on growth, we are all in. Our purpose as a company is to power an inclusive future for all. And that means you need to actually have everyone at the table across the industry.
How do you see, Fran, the ESG debate right now? We discussed this a bit yesterday, and it's really, permeating much of the Davos discussion there. What seems to be missing in a lot of the discussion here is the fragility of it politically in places like the United States, but others, asking, hey, are we changing the way companies are supposed to operate? Bottom line fundamentals, it's for stockholders, et cetera, et cetera. Are we burdening, companies with, moral responsibilities that don't fit? What are your views on ESG?
So my view is that sometimes we say the term ESG and then everything kind of turns off and we don't actually get to the content. And so I think one of the wisest things that we can do is when we talk ESG to get really specific. And when we're talking about the E, what are the goals that we as companies should have? And I think we all see what's happening more broadly within our planet. And hopefully that drives, again, the shared learnings in addition to the transparency. In the conversations that I've had here at Davos, it seems like the S right now is the most controversial. And I think it's the most controversial because there's a question around, one, how do you define it? What metrics do you look at? And then how, in focusing on the S, do you impose perhaps a set of beliefs on companies? What I will tell you from a Cisco perspective is everything within the S, we believe will make us better, will make us more competitive, and will drive that table where we actually have inclusion of so many demographics.
Do you think in the side of ESG, because we were talking yesterday a little bit about the E, which is environment, and the governance are a little bit more advanced than the S. What can the S do to catch up with the other two sectors?
Yeah, so a lot of times when we define the S, what we are talking about is inclusion. We are talking about access. From a Cisco perspective, we intersect what we do as a company with the S. And so you're also looking at what role do you play in addressing the digital divide as well. And so I think some of the basic things that many companies are already sharing are things like, what is the diversity of your company? What are the actions that you're taking? What do your pay parity numbers look like? Something that I look at from a Cisco perspective, which has always helped me quite a bit, is what does the hiring process look like? How inclusive is that as well? And so these are some of the basic things that, again, I do think make our companies so much stronger when we look longer term.
I'm going to ask one last question, and then can go for at least one question in the audience. And I may go to you, David, because you've been hanging out here. But I'm interested in you. I'm going to have Sarah Al Amiri here in a minute, and she is fascinating because she is the Minister for Public Education. She's the Minister for Science and Tech. She's the head of the space agency. The UAE sent this mission, what's called the Hope mission to Mars, a probe to Mars. They have a whole plan to do this ricochet shot around, a moon and Venus. It's, interesting stuff. But, I think that when you're kind of looking at, okay, when you have something like that and you're a small nation hitting so far, above the weight that many people think you could do, what are the lessons that you could share with her as she's trying to bring public education, bring more people into science? What are the tricks of the trade in terms of getting that ecosystem move further, faster, quicker?
Goodness, I've had the privilege to meet her. I think there's a lot she can teach us. And I think what I see when I look at UAE as an example is tremendous focus on education. And I think that's so important. And to your earlier question, there isn't one way. I do think for all of us, wherever we are in the world, having these inspirational moonshots, if you
Right.
will, rally us. And in a world right now where there's so much polarization on so many different things, I think having these big breakthroughs that take an amazing amount of collaboration and strength in people and technology, I think is pretty powerful.
Wow. Let me open questions. Let me get a mic over here because we're on live.
Thanks very much for your comments. Thanks
Sure.
for the opportunity. So,
And tell us who you are, David.
sure. So I lead corporate affairs for a company, Henry Schein. We're world's largest provider of products to essentially office-based healthcare workers, so dentists and physicians. Thinking about your comments about kind of training and helping to educate, which kudos to you, that's amazing. We look to do something similar, and I'm curious, how do you think about that in the context of preventing brain drain? Because you get some of these folks that are the best and the brightest, you train them up, they want naturally more opportunities for their families, and often what you see is these folks end up emigrating out of their own countries. How do you think about that in the context of public-private partnerships, public-private philanthropy, to ensure that those folks actually will stay and are incentivized to remain in their countries?
Great question.
It is such a good question. And I think it has to be, to your point, this combination of the education and the opportunities. And when you don't have that, once someone is educated, they're going to go where they can have the biggest opportunities. One of the things that we do at Cisco, we have a team called our Country Digital Acceleration Team. And they work on projects in about 44 countries around the globe, trying to drive a digital agenda that drives access to healthcare, to education, looking at how we automate ports as an example, how we drive hospitals to leverage technology in the most sophisticated way. And I think the opportunity for us is, how do we connect education to these opportunities? And something that we have found around the world is more and more apprenticeships are back. And I would say linking these programs to apprenticeships is a great way to keep that talent within the country as well.
Well, Fran Katsoudas, Executive Vice President and Chief People, Policy and Purpose Officer of Cisco Systems. Thank you so much for
Hey,
joining us.
thank
I hope
you.
you'll come back. We're planning to be back here every year, and one of the things I do want to track year to year is the broad question of, where is Africa going, by way of its tech challenges? Where is the Middle East going? Where are we in gender parity in our, tech sector? And what are we solving in terms of technology helping us to sculpt the societies we want to have, as opposed to where we're sort of forced to have? And I think you've helped open that conversation for us. So thank you so much, Fran. Thank
so
you
much.
very
Really
much. Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Great.